Hello, everybody. Well, it's all come out regarding Boris Johnson. By the way, thanks for coming back to the channel. Make sure you comment as we're going along. Boris Johnson was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom 2019 to 2022. He's no longer even an MP. So Johnson now a private citizen. But there's been a huge data leak from his private office about his time as Prime Minister and indeed what he's been doing since he resigned because he was forced out by his cabinet. Rishi Sunak, amongst other was the ostensible ground was the mishandling of the allegations that Chris Pincher was sexually assaulting men, a Tory MP. So a veritable treasure trove of confidential documents, and it tells us what he was doing since he stood down on the 6th of September 2022, 2 days before the Queen died. Anyway, so you mostly he was abusing his prime ministerial role for personal enrichment. He was already a multimillionaire from property, but from his journalistic writings, his books, his media appearances, giving speeches, and so forth. So there are rules about this that if you leave public office for a certain period of time, you can't take certain private roles because you could therefore be exploiting knowledge you'd made, you got contacts you'd made through your public role as a government minister. You could be using that for private emolument, and that would be unlawful and indeed unethical. Okay, so he's definitely misused this. He's also his public role and public funds for private gain. I'm not saying directly stealing taxpayers' money, but when he's on paid, time for the taxpayer, flying around on these jets paid for by the taxpayer, and so on. Got to distinguish between public and private. These publicly funded buildings, these office buildings, and so on, and that's not to be used for your own personal gain. So what he's been doing about meetings which he didn't declare, about how more times when he broke the Coronavirus Act, which he himself shepherded through Parliament in 2020. So various media organisations have now published this, but most notably came out on The Guardian a few days ago. Goodness. Now, he's subsequently established the office of Boris Johnson since he left that. Okay, and then he gets about £115,000 a year from the taxpayer to run this office on the grounds that he's still a public figure, still how somehow serving the people, even though he's no longer PM, or as I said, he's not actually an elected representative at any level these days. Okay, but that's arising from a special position in public life. That is the rationale behind it. So over 1,800 documents were leaked. These sometimes are invoices, as letters, spreadsheets, speeches, or stuff like that. Okay, distributed denial of secrets is the organization which leaked this thing, and we found out what's really going on, what Boris Johnson has been doing, and how he was soliciting donations from people who are not allowed to donate. Okay, so there is the public duty cost allowance that are referenced, 115,000 pounds a year. The PDCA, established by Lord Butler Brockwell, formerly head of my college, knew him quite well. Lord Butler was cabinet secretary, i.e. the top civil servant under Maggie Thatcher and John Major, and the first 6 months of Tony Blair. But anyway, you see what he's been doing since he was there, speaking to Wafik Saeed, who's not a British citizen, not even resident in him, and he's listed as a donor. Okay, when you're not allowed to get donations from people who are not British citizens, and so on. So this is really scandalous. And having meetings which were in breach of coronavirus rules and so forth. So Wafik Saeed, he claims no, he didn't donate. His wife donated. She's been a vociferous conservative all her life, and so on. But wait a second, the official notes of the meeting said that he was the donor, not her, and so on. So even more controversially, what he has been doing. And Wafik Saeed, yes, he did donate to the on the old days to the Conservative Party, but since the rules changed, that he hasn't done so. All right, but why then did they say that if that's not the case? Why did they say that it was him donating, Mr. Saeed, not Mrs. Saeed, and she is a British citizen, and yes, she is allowed to donate? So there are more things that are scandalous about what Boris Johnson has been up to. Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson. Okay, so he goes by his middle name, Boris. So he was always a liar, and indeed he was eventually kicked out of Parliament for his lies, and it was before a committee. 6 MPs, 4 of whom were Conservatives. And so the suspension was so long that meant automatic ejection from Parliament. This triggered a by-election in his Ruislip and Uxbridge South constituency, in which he was entitled to stand, but he chose not to contest it. Actually, the Tories held it, mostly by going hard against the ultra-low emission zone, which is actually not an issue of which Parliament has any sway. That's up to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, a Labour guy. But the fact that Boris Johnson's seat was held by the Tory party is really no reflection on him. So the other thing is that Johnson, he hosted dinner for a Conservative lord in Downing Street, and then this guy, this Tory peer, he paid for the refurbishment of a Downing Street flat, right? And that was after the second coronavirus lockdown took effect. He alleged a high-ranking Saudi official who Johnson met him whilst Johnson was PM, saying, can we share a pitch with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, better known as MBS. Anyway, Johnson was paid more than £200,000 after he met the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. It was a bit of a hate figure for the Trump administration. I bet, Johnson, who's a Trump brown noser, I bet he wouldn't like his friend Donald to know that one. The other thing is he had a meeting with Peter Thiel. He wanted to keep it secret. He's a billionaire who established Palantir, this American company. And then Palantir then got a role in the management of NHS data. Why was the meeting kept secret? It doesn't look right. If it was completely innocent, because the Prime Minister, followed by civil servants, all these public meetings, civil servants are there, anything with the public role, who did you meet, official notes taken of it, and things like that. So that ideally is to prevent them abusing it for private gain. Well, I'll do this if you give my sister a job. Okay, we won't do that in return for you buying shares in that company, or we'll give you this government contract if you put my cousin in whatever role, or you fire my enemy for your company, and then I'll make sure that so and so gets promoted to the civil service. No. Okay, so we found out what he's really been doing. Anyway, so that's why obviously Labour's gone into bat over this one, as they quite rightly should do. So he's completely unethical, and he shouldn't be getting this public subsidy because of what he's been doing. I mean, I don't think any prime minister should do it. But there are loads and loads of things come out. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, obviously, I wouldn't believe Boris Johnson. He's lied about all sorts of things. A disgrace to the Conservative Unionist Party. And I know he won a big election in 2019. And yes, he's a figure of fun. He likes to play the buffoon and so on. And he can be entertaining in small doses. But Boris Johnson believes only in Boris Johnson. He's got no ideology. He's utterly untrustworthy. He's broken all sorts of promises, inside politics, outside politics. Remember his oven-ready deal with Brexit, or that when he was editor of The Spectator, no, he wouldn't try to enter Parliament. So he will shamelessly break any promise sworn in a stack of Bibles. So you wouldn't trust him as long as you could throw him. And he screwed up in other ways. He's the one. Brexit, partly to reduce immigration, who loosened the immigration restrictions and put net immigration up to 800,000. A lot of the economic difficulties the United Kingdom is facing partly date back to his time. And he doesn't do his homework. He didn't understand his own coronavirus rules. He didn't follow his own coronavirus rules. So many lies, so many mistakes. Doesn't really have the attention span, and just deeply doesn't care. What actuates Boris Johnson? I remember my history teacher, the late lamented father, Dr. David Forrester, said, what makes him tick? The most important question about any historical figure. So many years later, I remember that. So Johnson, I suppose, is adulation. It's partly having an audience, wants to be loved and admired, and he had that for quite a long time. But so in the short term, yes, it was a great victory for the Conservative Party, but in the long term, it'll take a lot of living down Boris Johnson. All right, thank you so much for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, donate PayPal, georgecallan79@gmail.com. Goodbye.